Preston from childhood. My wife and I loved going to Blackpool for the illuminations. I have never ever lost contact with Swinton and Pendlebury in my old parish church in North Manchester, and so I have never ever lost contact with the north of England. So I don't just mean the north, I mean Lancashire. It's an enormous pleasure to be here, especially because 2 hours 11 years ago you honoured me with a doctorate, an honorary doctorate, which I am deeply and genuinely appreciative. And when I was asked to come and give this lecture, I literally jumped at the idea. I could not at all say no to that. I can't remember never having been aware of Jeremiah Horrocks, his friend William Crabtree, and their mutual friend William Gascoigne. I encountered him as a boy. I can't remember at what age, but I know certainly when I was at school I was interested in him, and I left it just not much over 15. So we're going a fair way back. He is one of the introductions I had to a fascination with astronomy, and historical astronomy as well, and also particularly to his friend William Crabtree from Salford, literally just a couple of miles down the road where I come from. And one thing really hit me right from the word go, as I became more and more interested in the history of astronomy. We're talking about 17, 18, 19. Why was it that great discoveries made in continental Europe by Kepler, by Gascoigne, by Galileo, by Tycho Brahe, and many others, all men in influential positions, holding university chairs, Royal Court astronomerships, things of this sort. Why was it that the next stage of the improvement took place in little houses in drafty, windswept Lancashire? I still don't know why, but it simply did. Was it being started initially in Prague, in Venice, Bologna, Leiden, and so on? Really next takes off here. And not in the context of a royal court or patronage or anything like that, but by a small group of friends who simply were minor gentlemen, yeoman farmers of the day. That kind of background. We often get this impression that in the past everybody was ignorant. Well, you had a few knobs and a few toughs, you see, went to Oxford and Cambridge, totally untrue. Knobs and toughs didn't usually go to university. It was the rising classes that went to university. And you have this idea that really the lower orders just ground down. That is a load of utter bilge. We have always generated talent, and it has always risen. What Jeremiah Horrocks would have been had he not died in his 22nd year, I can't imagine. But he was part of this tradition. But how did you get an education at that time? Well, there were a good few excellent grammar schools around, even at that time, even in wild and windswept Lancashire. Come in and say every day. In wild and windswept Lancashire.
We just pass it away.
I'm just starting. Anyway, that was it. Preston had a grammar school. Bolton had a fine one. Lancaster, Manchester, and several others. William Crabtree went to a school in Manchester, which would later become the grammar school. There was one in Liverpool too. So yes, you really could learn your Latin, your Greek, your mathematics, your ancient history, your Protestant theology, even here. Now, for those who think that it was an isolation, it simply doesn't happen. How did you get books at that much hool, which is hardly the centre of the universe, or you were living in a sulphur. Where did you get your books from? Do you know there was an amazingly sophisticated book trade across Europe? Books printed in Italy, let's say, or in Southern Europe, would have to be brought up once or twice a year to various North European cities, especially in Flanders, what we would now call Belgium, Holland, that area, in those days called the Low Countries, Ghent, Bruges, Antwerp, places like that. And then merchants would buy them, then they'd pass them on into England, Ireland, Scandinavia, you name it. And books printed in London, or Oxford, or Cambridge would go the same way. So it's by no means unlikely that you could be reading a 16th century book or a 17th century book in Lancashire, where the wind's howling outside and there's water rising in the as yet undrained marshes, that was printed in Italy 3 months before. That was another way too. Lancashire has a lot of coastline, and especially, of course, the Ribble and the Lune estuaries. Many people in those days, if you didn't actually have a vehicle, if you lived near the coast, you had a boat. Not infrequently, a fair-sized one that might get you from here to, let's say, Flanders or Ireland. Carr House, that beautiful house in Muchfield where Jeremiah Horrocks probably lived as a teacher, as a late teenager. Do you know it's made from bricks from Holland? How the heck did you get Dutch bricks to Muchfield? The local family traded with Holland. What you do, you load ballast into your ship to keep it still, probably Lancashire Sound in the Holland to keep it up, right? Get over there, no matter what else you were trading, have all the sand dug out, fill your hold and replace the sand with Dutch bricks, and come right the way around, and you've got your Dutch bricks in Muchfield. Travel was much, much more sophisticated and was much more elaborate than we often think. Letters likewise travelled across Europe. And you sometimes have men who refer to as intelligences, men who passed on intelligence. You know a Frenchman, or a German, or a Dutchman, who was in contact with friends with a similar interest. So you may want to write to somebody in England, and you'd send it to somebody in, let's say, Flanders, who knew somebody in London, who'd pass the letter on, and bingo, it would arrive in Sunderland, or somewhere like that. We know this happens, because that is how they had comment about what was going on in continental Europe. So in other words, they were not cut off in the dark, grunting, or anything like that. And this is why it becomes easy to understand why somewhere like Lancashire, and when I say like Lancashire, 400 years ago, Lancashire was a very, very thinly populated county. It was said it was where the king's writ did not run. It was so far away from London. Much of it not being drained, much of pilling and all that, it was just bog. And you went no ways around the bogs. Yet you were still getting books, letters, and intelligence from continental Europe. And I'm not suggesting that this is uniquely here. I've come across cases where this is happening in Devon and other parts of the country as well. In other words, there's a much, much higher emphasis on learning than we popularly think. What about universities? Well, most of the universities, Oxford and Cambridge, the two of that time, were actually free. Contrary to the rubbish we told about knobs and toffs, they were all created with scholarships. And who were the people who had the scholarships? Bright young boys. You may be your local vicar, or your local schoolmaster, had a friend in Oxford or Cambridge. And he might write and say, you know, young Jack so-and-so, young Jeremiah Horrocks, or whoever, right lad, he'd benefit from a Cambridge scholarship. And lo and behold, that's what happens. Little Jeremiah Horrocks at the grand old age of, get ready for this, any people in the audience schools and welcome to you all. 13 got a scholarship to Emmanuel College, Cambridge. He spent 4 years there. And in his 16th year, he came back to Lancashire permanently, without a degree. Why? Was he too lazy to take one? No! It was a common practice in those days. That when you'd got your education, you'd come home, work for several years, probably in his case a teacher or something like that, and when you're getting older, 22, 23, and doing well, go back to Cambridge, be tapped on the head by a copy of the New Testament by the Vice-Chancellor, and become Master of Arts. Now this is how the system worked. Who therefore are our friends, Horrocks, Crabtree and Gascoigne? Well, we don't know the year in which Horrocks was born, apart from the fact that it was said by his old college contemporary, who outlived him by 60 years, John Wallace, who died in 1703, that in fact Horrocks died in his 22nd year. He died on the 4th of January 1641, push that back 22 years, probably born in 1618, 1619. But there's no birth record, no baptismal record, nothing at all. Even his admission to Emmanuel College, Cambridge, doesn't specify his age. Who were the Horrockses? Well, they weren't low to depression. They came from the Tuxteth area of Liverpool. They were a curious bunch of hard-working, highly intelligent, successful, what we would call middle-class people. What they called in those days the middling sort. Above the below the gentry, but above the poor. We know, for instance, that his mother was called Aspinwall. We know that the Aspinwalls were local landowners. Whether she herself was of the landowning family, we're not very sure. But also, too, his father was a farmer, and probably a local cloth merchant. Lancashire, even before the textile industry, cotton, it was still a major centre for woolens, and particularly linen and Irish linen, not very far away across the Irish Sea. So this was a combination. We're told also too that he had an uncle called Jonas, who was a watchmaker, making watches in Tuxteth in 1635. Yes. Do you know, not very far from here to Liverpool, you have the area of Prescott. That area made watches for the London watch trade. They would have a domestic system. Well, part of the year you were farming, part of the year we were weaving, doing whatever you did. The rest of the time you'd make watches which you could do at any time. The watches were then sent on mule trains, wrapped in linen, to London. Well, they were sold in London, or maybe in Flanders, or maybe in almost certainly Jeremiah's uncle Jonas worked in that trade. And do you know, one of his watches still survives. And it is a beautiful instrument. I've seen it. And it's almost certain authority to be Jeremiah Horrocks' uncle's watch. I'm sure, therefore, that he learned a lot of practical skills within the family. Certainly precision making of things was there at the same time. And then a learned education. He was educated by a man we think called John Cotton, who was a clergyman and educator in the area of Tuxteth and Liverpool. A man who later went out and resettled in America, at Boston. So therefore he would have acquired an excellent education as a 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old. What would his excellent education be? Not what you'd have today. You'd start with Latin, the root language of European civilization. You have Latin, you can read Virgil, or Cicero, or Vesalius, or Ptolemy, or anybody like that. You are in touch with the whole range of learning in Christendom. Then you learn Greek, the language of Plato, Aristotle, and so on. And you would cry this, can you imagine today, our friends across some schools are in today, welcome to them. Can you imagine playing in the playground of your schools and telling Latin jokes to each other? Many schools insisted that the boys, sadly at that time, girls didn't get an academic education, but the boys actually spoke Latin in school. So if you said to somebody, get your hands out of my bag, you thinking little devil, you'd say that in Latin. In other words, it gave you a fluent command of the classical tongues. You'd probably pick up other stuff as well. In languages, you'd probably pick up to some Hebrew to teach you to read the Old Testament in the original language. And then, literature, geometry, mathematics, and astronomy. Yes, astronomy was taught in medieval and Renaissance European schools. Yes, it was the astronomy of Ptolemy, where everything goes around the earth, but it was rooted in mathematics, in logic, and exact, precise thinking. This is what Jeremiah would have got as the schoolwork. This was the standard curriculum of his age. It was a similar one had you been in France, or Italy, or Poland, or somewhere like that. We don't actually do the advantages of speaking Latin. You want to go and study in Italy, or want to go to France or somewhere. You don't speak Italian, or French, or Polish, or whatever. But all educated people will speak Latin. So you imagine, you go to a lecture in, let's say, Bologna, or something like that, or Paris. No French, no Italian, sit there. The language of the Caesars washes over you, and you know. This is an amazingly open world. This is Jeremiah Horrocks' inheritance. He goes to Emmanuel, Cambridge, and people like Peter Orton, who've done a lot of work on Horrocks' family history. In fact, he wasn't a woman. There were a whole bunch of Horrockses and Aspinwalls. Went to Oxford, maybe Oxford, and a few to Cambridge, in the 60 years before him. Brasenose and Christchurch colleges, which are the most famous. He probably went to Cambridge because his old teacher, his cop was his teacher, was himself an old Emmanuel man. So he should send him up to your college. This is not a little world. This is a big world. At Cambridge he would have had a similar kind of curriculum. But there at first too he bought books. He read books. There were far more books in Cambridge or in Oxford than there are, let's say, in a grammar school in Liverpool. He mentions a list of over 30 books he either owned or read. And this was an impressive list. Every single one of them was written by a continental author. And all of them were in Latin. So we then see his basis of the education he received, and his love of mathematics, his love of practicality, his love of astronomy. There was also, too, almost certainly in Cambridge, or maybe in London, that he learned about the Copernican theory. The idea of the Earth going around the Sun, which was not banned, that is absolute nonsense legend. It was not banned either here nor in the continent. The reason why most people didn't accept the Copernican theory was a jolly good one. It didn't seem that the Earth was moving, did it? It seemed an affront to common sense. It was 60 years before there were clear proofs that the Earth was moving mathematically. Horrocks and his friends, however, worked on the idea that the Earth probably does move around the Sun, and much of their thinking was in this area. He also had a friend at Emmanuel, a lad called John Worthington, from Manchester. And we know that they probably walked or shared a horse between Cambridge and the northwest. Two young men, 15, 16 years old, coming all the way from Cambridge to Lancashire, probably on foot, maybe about 50 miles a day, or on a borrowed horse, a cheap, wind-broken, knackered horse. And Manchester is the next stop before Liverpool. And by went badly off. Almost certainly, that is how he came to meet his great friend and correspondent, William Crabtree of Salford. Because Salford and central Manchester are literally only separated by the river Allan. We don't quite know how they did it, but almost certainly it would have come through Crabtree. Let me say who William Crabtree was. He never went to university, but went to what would become Manchester Grammar. He was devouring books from an early age. And he had a sophistication of scientific knowledge, well beyond what you might assume a local merchant to have. He also had fluent Latin, fluent Greek. We know this from what he cites, which would have not been got hold of in translation. And he is described as a draper, or a clothier. He was older than Horrocks. He was born in 1610, making him 8 or 9 years older than Horrocks. Horrocks is therefore a teenager. Crabtree is already a married man in his mid-20s. But indeed, having made his money, through textiles, always the lifeblood of the Northwest. He probably, as a clothier, would have employed handloom weavers who made probably linen, not much common at that time in the Northwest. They would make linen pieces, as they were called, pieces of cloth. And they would then be taken to London for sale, passed on to Flanders, and into the international trade. That's what the clothier was. He was a merchant businessman. Now, if you're sending cloth to London and cloth to Flanders, well, you can see how books and letters and instruments you come the other way, can't you? You know, somebody like Crabtree had a lot of contacts out of the Northwest, in London, and almost certainly in continental Europe. So the picture gets bigger, doesn't it? This is not just simply people in small cottages in Lancashire. It's contact with the big world out there. There's, yes, it was got the internet, they haven't got mobile phones, but they got letters, and they got the written word, and they needed people to take them to and fro across. Crabtree was an amazingly learned man. His letters are full of detail, and I look forward to seeing tomorrow morning with the county record of his here, which has recently come to light, a little 6-page manuscript, which he wrote on calculating the date of Easter. What was that about? Calculating the date of Easter. At this time, how did you know when to celebrate the principal Christian festival of the year, Easter? You did it by mathematics, laid down centuries before, and some of it laid down in detail by what I call Britain's first astronomer, the Venerable Bede, a Benedictine monk of Jarrow, up in Geordieland. I like to tell people that Britain's first astronomer was a Geordie. Literally he was. He wrote on calculating the date of Easter in 700 AD. His methods were well known. But there'd been a problem with the date of Easter. The date keeps slipping back. It's governed by the full moon in spring. But the thing is, you see, the ancient astronomers who laid this down didn't realize that the year is not 365 and a quarter days long. It's 365 days, 5 hours, 50-odd minutes, and some seconds. Doesn't matter for the short run. But you let the centuries roll by, and you slide into error. And the erudition and the learning that Crabtree has in this little 6-page manuscript is amazing. He knows the mathematics, the sources, the scriptural sources. He is a learned man, as learned as any Oxford or Cambridge done on that day. And he sells cloth from Manchester, or Salford. So therefore I suspect they met in Manchester. There's another thing that Crabtree did as well. He made maps. He did surveys. And some of his maps still survive. Beautifully drawn charts of small estates and farms. But clearly the owner would have wanted him to do a map. Probably to purchase and a legal document. So we have him like merchant, surveyor, person involved with the local business affairs, and passionate astronomer and classical scholar. All rode into one, and he and Horrocks meet, and they get on like a house on fire for the next 5 years till Horrocks dies. We don't quite know when they met, but they were certainly knowing each other well by June 1636. And their earliest letters still indicate familiarity. They're not just met, they're chatting already with each other. The earlier letters are gone. So here we have these two men. What are their letters about? These letters would have done credit to Galileo, Kepler, Tycho Brahe, or any of the great European giants of science. Does the Earth move around the Sun? This was one of their key things. How do you find whether the Earth moves around the Sun? Not by debating or speculating. That's no good. These men are practical scientists. You do it by measurement. By accurate, tiny little angular measurements. To see if the discrepancies correspond with patterns. And do those patterns suggest a moving Earth or a moving object? There were also great fans of Johannes Kepler, who only recently died. Kepler suggested not only did the Earth go around the Sun, but did so in an elliptical orbit. They were trying to measure the diameter of the Sun and Moon at key times of the year to see if the tiny changes in size corresponded with elliptical orbits. And they found they did. They were the first people to draw clearly that the Moon moves around the Earth in an elliptical orbit. This was not done in Prague, it was not done in Italy, it was not done by a great state-funded astronomer or an astronomer to a prince. It was done by what I think was probably a village schoolmaster in rural Lancashire around 1638, Jeremiah Horrocks, and his pal Crabtree, 30 miles down the road in Salford. In 1637, there's one of those remarkable phenomena of an occultation of the Pleiades. The Pleiades are a lovely little cluster of stars near Gemini. And an occultation is when the dark side of the moon, in other words, you would have a half moon, other half not lit up, the dark side passes over the stars. So they can calculate exactly when this is going to happen. They observe that what's called occultation or transit. Why do they observe it? Well, first of all, they know the exact positions of the stars in the Pleiades. But if you're trying to work out whether the moon has an elliptical orbit, you don't really have an exact measuring point to go against. But if it's going to be with the stars in the Pleiades, you can tell where the moon is for a given night of the year, at a given hour of the night, by which star it's touching. It's a brilliant idea. You're using the stars to fix the position of the moon, and you're trying to use that to tell you whether the moon's orbit is an ellipse or a circle. Not bad for a 17-year-old in a Lancashire village. Then they notice this, Horrocks notices this, in his letter to Crabtree. When you see the dark side of the moon touch their star, the stars are snuffed out. One after the other. That shouldn't be the case. The ancients believed that the stars actually had diameters. There should have been a sort of sudden fade. No. The stars were only points of light. And what they do from this too is that these stars are probably at an enormous, infinite distance from the Earth. They already realized at that time that the stars were probably suns in their own right. This is quite well known in the literature of the day. But that is why they thought they had circles, you see, diameters. But if you had suns so far away that you snuff them out like that, how big was the universe to cry out that? This is again in an English village, a Lancashire village, not in a royal court by measuring the lunar diameter. Try this, and if you can try it without any harm to your eyes whatsoever, or even the sun's diameter. If you go into a dark building, as dark as you can get it, and have a little hole in the wall or a shutter or something like that, let's say a barn 20 feet wide. Then when the sun is in the right place, it will produce a beautiful disc on the far wall. You can see sunspots on it. There's not that. But then, take an accurate pair of compasses, measure the diameter of that disc, and divide it into the projection distance back to the hole. And doing that, you can work out the angular diameter by trigonometry. They try doing this at different times of the year to see if at June, or at Christmas, or Easter, the sun's changing in size. And lo and behold, it is. They're measuring an electricity in the orbit by projecting images across barns or wherever and stacking them off with a pair of compasses. This is, again, I think, globally significant. But then, Horrocks is a brilliant planetary calculator, and he studied a thing which is rare. Occasionally, a planet nearer to us than the Sun will pass across the Sun's disk, a transit. Now, in 1631, there'd been a superb transit in Mercury. And indeed, Johannes Kepler, the great German astronomer, who I may say at that time was astronomer to the Holy Roman Emperor in Prague. You couldn't have had a much more high-status astronomer than that. He predicted that Venus would pass across the Sun's disk a few weeks later. Nobody could actually see it because in Eastern Europe, because in Western Europe, it would only be visible in the Americas. In other words, the sun would be too low in the sky. Horrocks revisited Kepler's published calculations, and he hit something enormous. Venus will also pass across the sun on the 24th of November, 1639. And he realized that what Kepler has got wrong, and this is a 17-year-old challenging a European court astronomer, but he's realized he got wrong. Kepler has disappointed the cycle. We get a pair of transits 8 years apart, then about another 120 years, and another pair. So what does he do? Right after his pal Crabtree and Solver, keep your eyes peeled all over the 24th of November 1639. Keep the little telescope pointed on the sun, projecting the image. Well, we have a detailed account of that was published some years later. Horrocks tells us this. He'd done much school as some kind, I think, of Bible clerk. He couldn't have been a priest, he was not old enough to be a priest. I think probably working as a schoolmaster and also being a Bible clerk, reading the lessons on Sunday in church, assisting the vicar. He says that he couldn't keep an eye all day on the sun because he was called to things of a higher calling, divine service. So he had to keep attending church. But between services, he'd get his telescope on, and well, there's no Venus, no Venus. The very end of the day, the sun is only about 1.5 degrees above the horizon. It is almost on the horizon, on the flat lands of the fire. On Sunday, a little black disk has moved onto the sun. He gets 3 separate fixes for its position, and the sun goes. You imagine he has shown himself to be completely right. He's about 20 years old by this time. He has predicted something that the great mathematicians of Europe missed. Luckily, his pal Crabtree in Salford did exactly the same thing. And he got it. So both men have exactly the same observation. And it seemed that at that time of day, the usual sort of cloud cover of Lancashire, and then a crack in the sky to the west just before sunset. So as we all know, these dull, dark, heavy, wet Lancashire Novembers, and suddenly, brilliant sunset blazes across the sky. They both get to the position. Both of them get exactly the same results, and they are delighted. Now, this fits perfectly with the ideas they have developing. But one thing surprising them, the image of Venus on the disk of the sun was very, very tiny. In specific terms, about 1.5 minutes of arc. Tiny. Venus should have been enormous. Horrocks says something which you may think is a bit what you call schoolboy talk. Well, not quite a schoolboy like that. Let him be to Cambridge. He says we all thought Venus, the Roman goddess of beauty, was always completely modestly clothed in flowing robes. But when we see the sun shining through her dress, we see her real figure. You might say, judge her double, give her a box in his head. That's what he says. That Venus is stripped of her shining robes. You see her real size. And it's very tiny. Why have they got it wrong? He realizes that Venus can't be a big object, it's a small object. He could even calculate its approximate size. Crabtree had seen exactly the same thing. What happens, of course, normally, as they realize, Venus somehow or other blazes with light because there's something about it that blazes. We don't know, they didn't know this at that time, but we don't know this because it's covered with dense cloud. And hence the clouds shine and they appear brilliant in the sky. Shine through the clouds of the sun behind him, the clouds disappear. Well, Horrocks is so struck by this, he writes it up into a treatise. It's originally in English, but later translated into Latin. Venus in Soli Visa. Venus seen above the disk of the sun. He marshals evidence in there, which not only shows immense breadth of learning, citing all the great mathematicians of Europe and so on, but describing his technique, his meticulous way of observing, Crabtree's parallel, meticulous way of observing, and marshals a tremendous argument which says this. First of all, the planets are actually much smaller than legend thinks. Also, too, the orbit that Venus he sees going around the sun in relationship to the sun is probably corresponding to an elliptical orbit, like Kepler and like the Moon. And also he points out, too, that Venus on the sun looks very, very different from a sunspot discovered by Galileo 30 years before. Sunspots actually are a bit unfocused, penumbra and umbra, middle part dark, outer part's light. And these spots change shape with the sun in the same way that if, let's say, that's the spot face onto you, it gets thinner as it gets over here. Venus is jet black in contrast. And it does not change any shape. It is clearly between us and the sun is an illuminator behind it. He calculates Venus's orbital velocity. How fast is it moving in that time? It is an amazing mathematical body that he extracts from this. He never sees it in print, but we'll come back to that in a few minutes. He also continued to observe in the sky with meticulous instruments. And also on this superb bust or statue of Horrocks, we see him with a thing he had called a cross star. I made one of these, they work, I've tried all these techniques experimenting myself. It has a pair of pointers that show. It's a bit like a crossbow. And so you shine like that, you can measure the sizes of objects, and you can measure the distance between Venus, the Sun, Mercury, and so on. By shining these, by moving these pointers together, and then when you've got the right fix, calculations on that in relationship to the length of the stick, a great triangle will give you the angle. It was called an astronomical radius. I made them, and they were. Well, I got Horrocks at the age of 20. Crabtree at, well, by now about 30. What occurred, they meet a man they hadn't known before. And we know they hadn't met this man before, because when they start to correspond with him, there's no mention of him seeing the transit of Venus, which he would have done had he known him in November. This is William Gascoigne, who lived at a small village just outside of Leeds. Now, Leeds in those days was not a big, thriving city. It was a small Yorkshire market town, maybe with a population of 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people. Probably almost larger Yorkshire woolen tandem weavers. Who were the Gascoignes? They were Lutheran gentry. They owned land, but they were immensely wealthy. And William was also too a passionate mathematician, astronomer, classical scholar, an observer, yet another. We don't know how they met, but I think, and others have suggested this too, Tangley Hall, near Burnley, the seat of Christopher Tangley and his brother Richard, elder brother Richard. The Tangleys were major Lancashire landowners. At that time, they were suffering because of their Roman Catholic faith. They would not acknowledge the Protestant Church, and they were taxed out of existence. But nonetheless, they were old Lancashire gentry, going back centuries. Gascoigne was also a Yorkshire Lancashire, a Yorkshire Catholic gentleman. And almost certainly the Tangleys and the Gascoignes knew each other as part of the northwestern Roman Catholic learned community. I think it probably was the Tangleys that put them in charge. There's a lovely letter sent in September 1640 by Gascoigne, by Horrocks. He just, by Crabtree. He had just been to see him, because he thanked him for his hospitality and all the rest of it at my house in Yorkshire. But then, Crabtree is literally captivated by something he had seen there. Because in addition to being a Roman Catholic Yorkshire gentleman, William Gascoigne is a born inventor. He had tried to take this kind of device, familiar to the astronomers of Europe. Horrocks did not invent this, he found in various books at the time, and mechanize it and make it smaller. And what he had done was this. He realized that if you have a telescope, and you find the point where the focus falls in the telescope, if you insert through the tube a pair of pointers like pins, you can move the pins just slightly to make it sandwich the sun or the moon or whatever. And then when the focal length of the telescope, lo and behold, you can measure the diameter of the sun or whatever. Much better than projecting it across a bar. How do you control the motion of those pins? A pair of screws, precision screws. Turn, it will move. So you have a pair of these, sandwich the sun between them, know the distance, count the number of screw turns, 40 threads to the inch, and the inch divided into hundreds. You can make a spectacularly accurate measurement. It was the micrometer, an instrument that would later transform all engineering. You imagine about anybody here with engineering background, you imagine the G micrometers and all the accurate adjustments. This was invented in a small Yorkshire manor house at around Christmas time, 1639. Crabtree says, "Can I purchase it with affection or buy it with gold?" He goes, "I won't." He seems to the car, probably different, I suspect. He then tells Horrocks about this little device. But don't forget again, you were talking of 1640. We're very near the end of Jeremiah's life. But what more can we say about Gascoigne? He tells us he travelled wider. He tells us he had studied in Oxford and spent several years studying that. He's not on the list of the university. He's not what we call a matriculated student. Probably because he was a Roman Catholic. It was often uncommon for Roman Catholics to attend the university, attend the lectures and things of this sort, but to take degrees or to be officially on the books. We also have stories too that he probably studied at the Roman Catholic College in Rome. There's many references to Gascoigne on the continent. All of them written years later, so there was a little bit of uncertainty about them when he was well traveled. Roman Catholics also went abroad for their education, to France or to Italy, and he seemed to be in that too. Even so, he was perfectly happy to be friends with Protestants. The popular idea, you know, of bashing each other's heads in and hating each other's guts. No! Protestants and Catholics happily corresponding, happily meeting with shared interest. After all, they're both Christians, so why should there be a problem? Just puts paid to this popular idea of the headbang scenario that we're always peddling out with as well. Likewise, too, they visit Townley Hall in Ireland, Catholic Squire's house. Jeremiah Horrocks probably almost certainly with them, certainly Crabtree. No problem at all in this social mixing. Now, what takes place here is a rather sad affair. We are approaching the outbreak of the English Civil War, which breaks out in the autumn of 1642. We don't know how Jeremiah Horrocks died, but we know it was sudden. Various people suggested over the years he had heart problems or he was delicate, and so I can't buy it. If you are out at night with a device like that, of the damps of a Lancashire evening, you must be pretty tough. Especially if you're going to go to bed if you wanted. He was a fit young 21-year-old. But then, in some surviving letters he had sent to William Crabtree in Salford, Crabtree had written on, "This was the last letter of my dear friend, Mr. Horrocks, whom he calls my second self. Such good friends had they become, and almost entirely corresponding friendship with occasional meetings." And he went on to say, he died on the morning that he was due to come and see me here in Salford, the 4th of January, 1641. Now, that's the depth of winter. There are no trains or cars or buses. The route from Tunstall, by that time he was living back in Tunstall, he'd left Hook. It's a 30-mile journey across marshes, bogs, and probably awful weather. If he was going to set on that journey, he was certainly not failing violent, I'll tell you that. But he never got to Salford. He may never even pull it started. We don't know what killed him. He could have fallen from his horse and broken his neck. He could have fallen into the marsh, flooding marshes, and just tragically drowned. We don't know. Jeremiah Horrocks is just vanished. We have no idea. There's no evidence that he was murdered or anything like that. He just stopped. And then, some years later, his son Crabtree dies in 1644. He dies definitely of illness. His will survives, and his will says that I am sound in mind, but sick in body. In other words, I'm capable of thinking clearly to do my will, but I'm not going to probably live very long. He died, and it fits nicely too, because in August 1644, there's a man called William Crabtree buried in the grounds of the Manchester Collegiate Church, what's now Manchester Cathedral. They both died within about 4 years of each other. What about Gascoigne? He also dies in 1644. in July 13. He dies as a soldier in the Royalist army. Gascoigne had joined the King's cause, and there was a great battle at Marston Moor, at the moorland over between Lancashire and Yorkshire, where Cromwell's troops frankly smashed the Royalist troops. Gascoigne died. His great friend, Richard Townley, died in the same battle. And Richard's brother, Christopher, survived and went on to write the whole story. It was said of Gascoigne, he died in the great fight at Marston Moor, fighting for the king. No place of burial, he was only just thrown into a pit, as they did with the dead after a battle. It's an extraordinary ending to a story, but it's not an ending. These men were already becoming famous. People were starting to collect their letters. John Worthington, he has two big fans. One is John Worthington, with whom, of course, he had brought to Manchester as a lad. And the other one, too, is John Morris. Both of them valuable men, and both of them fairly long. Indeed, Worthington would stay in Cambridge to an academic career, and would later become a head of a college in Cambridge. Likewise, Morris would eventually end up a civilian professor of geometry at Oxford. So both went the long leg and went very high in the world of learning. Both of them were keen to preserve the memory of Horrocks and his friends. And this is what they start to do. They and various others started collecting their letters wherever they are available. And in 1672, John Wallis publishes a fairly thick book of Horrocks' letters and Crabtree's letters called Opera Posthuma, the posthumous works of Jeremiah Horrocks and his friends. They were translated, I emphasize, into Latin for an international readership. These men are far too important for English. They have to be for a foreign learned audience. And in fact, by that time, they already had fans in Italy, France, and even Poland. You mean Poland? How are they famous in Poland, for crying out loud? The world of international merchants. Horrocks, I mentioned, had written a treatise about the transits of Venus, about which he and Crabtree had done. It's a beautifully crafted piece of work. We know that the copy was finally acquired by some means by Worthington in Cambridge. There were no photocopies in those days, and he had several copies, handwritten copies, made duplicates. And they were sent around to various people. In 1660, the Royal Society was founded in London. Now, one of the great and the good of British science, with their friends in France and so on. And also, right to the word go, the Royal Society was electing distinguished foreign scientists to join it. Poles, Italians, Germans, Dutchmen, and so on. International science. And Horrocks' manuscript gets given to one Christian Huygens, or as by Dutch section we call Huygens of Leiden. He was in correspondence with another fellow of the Royal Society in Borough, Jan Welke, or the Latin name which he always used, Johannes Hibelius. Now he was really Mr. Moneybags. He owned the biggest brewery in Danzig, Gdansk as we would now call it. He was a passionate, serious, high-level, European famous astronomer. And he acquires a copy of Horrocks' manuscript. Danzig of the Southern Baltic. And in 1661, there was another transit of Mercury. Lots of transits of Mercury, only every few years. And he observed it, and he wrote a book called Mercurius in Sole Visa in Latin. He then translated Horrocks' book into Latin and published it as a companion piece to his own big treatise. The Royal Society, the Bodleian, and a number of other libraries I know well handsome folio book. Beautifully printed. How much it must have cost him earnest to pay for it? A handsome sum in those days. And it's what takes Jeremiah Horrocks to the big readership in Europe. 1662 it was printed. Mercurius in Soli Visa, incorporated as a separate essay, Horrocks' Venus in Soli Visa of 23 years before. All of a sudden, literally, Horrocks, Crabtree and Gascoigne hit the European mind stage. The first astronomer royal, John Flamsteed, is an absolutely adoring fan of old Greek men. And you find people like Giovanni Domenico Cassini, first in Bologna, then in Paris, Christian Huygens, Johannes Livenius, like St. Paul's, Germans, Dutchmen, Italians, and so on. All Horrocks fans. This is simply how their reputation spreads. They have never lost that reputation. Sir John Herschel, in the 19th century, described Horrocks as, quote, the pride and boast of British astronomy, the founding father of British astronomy in every serious way. But Horrocks is now being admired by astronomers royal, professors, court astronomers, all the great and good and intellectual Europe, and all of this has been happening within literally a few square miles of wet, dark, dank Lancashire countryside, just slightly over the Pennines in Leeds, and to one or two other manor houses as well, such as just outside Burnley. There were also others too, which I really haven't got to talk about, because they share so many. Jeremy Shackleton. You all know the very Pendle famous of the witches? Forget the witches, forget Mother Dyke and all that rot. Think of Jeremy Shackleton. Sir George Wharton. Who lived in the area too? Mathematicians and astronomers in correspondence with London and the continent. They're slightly the next generation, 1650s. And what are they? Horrocksophiles. And in fact, Jeremy Shackleton published a set of tables in the 1660s where he actually, for the first time, says an adulation in print to Crabtree, to Horrocks. And he actually speaks it with Master Jeremy Horrocks, as he calls him. Indeed, Shackleton, Lancashire lad, were getting into India, where he observed the first ever transit of Mercury seen in India, and probably the first ever observation with a telescope in India, an astronomical observation with a telescope in India. And he died of something in India. There's simply a reference of many years later, quote, he died in the East Indies, which was in those days the Indian was called the East Indies. The West Indies were across the Caribbean, the East Indies was the Indian Ocean. So you've got here a cluster of men, mathematicians, astronomers, classical scholars, of European international standing. They were all from Lancashire, one of them from Yorkshire. They were all largely self-taught, or at least scholarship boys taught in Cambridge. What they would have done had they lived longer is anybody's guess. But it's not for nothing that Flamsteed, the first astronomer royal, vastly outnumbered them. And even 150 years after Flamsteed, 200 years after they had died, Sir John Herschel calls him the pride and the boast of British astronomy. We have a lot to be thankful for in Lancashire, and certainly a great deal to be proud of. And long before there were cotton mills or heavy industry here, when Lancashire was largely bog, marsh and fen, and some sunny ground at the foothills of the Pennines, all of this is happening here. Thank you very much indeed. All of you who are immensely welcome from schools, don't forget Horrocks is doing this when he was your age. So just take that as an inspiration. Take that as an inspiration that you can do what he did nearly 400 years ago. Here we have the window in Buxton Parish Church. He put it in 1874 and showing Horrocks in a not quite authentic posture, observing what's supposed to be a projection of the transit between this and sheeted clock. Is there a pointer? There's a pointer. Oh, go. Next one, please. This is a beautiful little parish church in Buxton, just literally, well, 8 miles out of central Preston. It was there that Horrocks had some kind of job, Bible time, I suspect, where he was also tutored to learn the Stones family's children. Next one, please. This is another modern 1874 memorial showing the transit of Venus, and the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. Oh, lovely. Thank you very much, Mr. Chapman. From Psalm 19. There we are. Yes, sir. Thanks, yes, sir, please. This is the manor house at Buxton. Legend has it that it was in this front in this room here, allegedly where he made the observation. I personally don't think so. Whether the family would have let him do that or not, I don't know. My suspicion is he had the apparatus set up in a large barn outside. More than that. Next one, please. And the memorial, which of course was put there for the Chorley Civic Society, and because the Red Rose of Lancashire. Next one, please. This is a lovely, rather apocryphal painting from the 19th century. It's in Liverpool, showing Horrocks, I don't know if you can point to it, with a telescope there, projecting onto a screen. A more authentic way of observing. Next one, please. This is the technique. I've drawn with this. What you have here is a telescope projecting an image of the sun on a piece of paper, and what it is doing is allowing you to trace the position of Venus, which was a pre-drawn disk of the sun. Next one, please. This is Horrocks' radius. This is based on the one I made, which was used as a pattern for the wonderful sculpture we have here. Like I said, that's a measured distance between the sun and the moon. Those 2 pointers will give you the fixed position. You're drawing a large equilateral triangle, a triangle from which are the digits and the known length of the rod, which you calculate the angle between. You calculate the angle between. Yes, sir, please. Now, one other thing that Horrocks did, he wanted to find out after the transit of Venus how big Venus was. And he tried something which I tried many years ago. He must have had superbly acute eyesight. He wanted to measure the diameter of Venus. But the theory is this. You have a very long rod with the eye down here somewhere. And in that rod, you have like an ear sticking up with a hole bored in it of no diameter. You would then move it and get Venus in the hole and move it back and forth until you finally get a point where Venus completely fills the hole. Knowing already the diameter of the hole and knowing the projection distance, you can calculate the diameter. He was able to do so because he actually found the matter how long he had it. He couldn't make Venus completely fill the hole without some black star around it. And certainly the stars could not be measured. You may wonder, how did you measure the diameter of a very small hole at that time? Such as you take a needle and poke it through a car to make a small hole. Well, I suggest this. And it works, I've tried. Take any needle you like, poke it through a car and make a hole. Then take some fine thread and wrap it round the needle. let's say 1 inch, tightly wrapped around the needle in a series of consecutive coils. When you take exactly 1 inch of it, split it up, measure the length, and then by division you can work out, using this guide, the diameter of the needle by the pi r squared law. It was simple Euclidean geometry. That's how they thought it was. Next one, please. Now this is the observation which is published by Hevelius. Here we see Horrocks' 3 drawings, and there is the projection distance of the sun, 360 degrees, and we get 3 observations before the sun finally sets. Crabtree gets exactly the same thing. Next one, please. That is a page of a London edition of Horrocks' Postilla. This is just slightly later. This is 1663, a year after it was published in Gdańsk. Next one, please. This is a wonderful mural portrait painted by Ford Madox Brown, the great Victorian artist, in Manchester Town Hall in about 1880. It shows Crabtree observing the transit of Venus. There his wife, Elizabeth, and we only had children. All the touch of his room with telescopes and so on, his watch on the table and so on. The only thing is, you look at that, and for dramatic effect, Ford Madox Brown has made Horrocks look 70, which is 29. So that made it a 29. That's what we do. And this is his house. And like I say, I've been fascinated by this man, Crabtree William Gascoigne. And then it was realised in the 1990s that the remnants of his house still stood. In fact, a substantial part of it stood. It's a small lake called Broughton Spout in Salford. That is as it appears today. And it's very, very close to surviving the engraving of 200 years before. Next one, please. And this is a plaque that is attached nearby, which I have the honour to be asked to unveil. Shows the transit of Venus, and here's a little map showing exactly how to find Broughton Spout from a major road going through Salford. Next one, please. Now, I mentioned the micrometer. This is the development from William Gascoigne. Robert Hooke, who of course I write about recently, and Robert Hooke was at Christchurch. He actually first introduced the micrometer to the Royal Society in 1667. This is the first ever drawing of a micrometer. That is the Gascoigne instrument drawn to represent it in the Royal Society. With all the various precision screws and so on, and show you how it fits into the eyepiece of the telescope at the very top. Next one, please. Now, this is my own reconstruction of the micrometer. You imagine that you have a lens and it projects onto a screen. Divide that into the length, and you get the diameter of an angle. Much more accurately, put a screw, a pair of pointers, sandwich the sun like that, as it were, and now by counting 40 threads to the inch, you get it with vastly greater accuracy. This is the logic behind the micrometer. It was, as it were, mechanizing the screw, a device which otherwise was a wood device. I may say he had the first one made by a watchmaker of Leeds. Watchmakers in Tunstall, watchmakers in Prescott, watchmakers in Leeds. And there was technological industry in the north at that time too. Next one, please. And this, of course, is a Horrocks Observatory in Moor Park in Preston. Next one, please. And an early photograph of the observatory in its early days, black and white sepia days, and this, I think, dates from the eclipse of 1927, when, in fact, an observatory was put up in Moor Park, I think, especially for that event, and is now a Euclid astronomical institution. Sadly, of course, light pollution is very much of a problem today. I think that's my last one. There we are, and finally, yes, and there we are, finally, Dr. Horrocks in his regard. Could we have the lights again, please? Thank you.